I'll begin at Denny's in San Diego, California. It's an appropriate place to begin, isn't it? You know? Actually, it's crazy because I had just given a seminar in San Diego, and there were two Calvinist gentlemen who not only did not like the presentation I gave on the Catholic faith, they were adamant that I was wrong in I think it might have been a presentation of the Church's teaching on the Blessed Virgin Mary and her role in the communion of saints. And so at the end of the question and answer period, which followed the seminar itself, they desired that I should sit down with them at greater length and talk about these things. I think they wanted to set me straight and show me the error of my ways as a Catholic. So I agreed to go to Denny's with them, and what I was doing at Denny's at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, drinking coffee, I'll never know. I probably stayed awake for the next week after that. But we had a marathon session at that Denny's late in the evening. I on one side of the booth with my Bible, the two of them on the other side with their Bibles. And we were going back and forth. This is how so often Catholic and Protestant discussions often go. Many of you I know are converts to the faith. You may have been on the other side of the table at one point in your life in talking to Catholics. And this was a very lively discussion, but it was also very frustrating because these two Calvinists were not getting anywhere with me, nor did I seem to be getting anywhere with them. And so after about 2.5 hours of this, all of us were feeling a little bit worse for wear, and we didn't feel as though we had much to show for it. Because it kept getting down to them saying, well, that's not biblical. And so I would quote a Bible passage to support what I was trying to say, and they'd say, well, you're just misinterpreting it. You don't understand what that really means. And I'd say, well, then why should I accept your interpretation? Are you infallible? Do you have the authority to interpret this passage in such a way that I am bound to accept your interpretation? They said, well, no, but this is what the passage means. And I said, well, I don't think so. And so it just became this standoff, and perhaps you've been in a situation like that. So I got this idea. I had heard this somewhere, and by now I can't tell you where I heard it. This is going back over 20 years ago that this conversation took place. But I wrote down these 6 words on a napkin. I wrote down, I never said you stole money. Put a period at the end. And I turned the napkin around in front of these two fellows, and I said, now, do you understand what I just wrote on this napkin? They looked at the napkin. I never said you stole money. They said, yeah, sure, we understand. I said, are you sure you understand what I wrote? Do you know the meaning of what I wrote by these words? And they said, well, of course, it's obvious. I never said you stole money. What's so big about that? What's so difficult about that? And I said, well, here's my real question. What if my meaning was, I never said you stole money? Somebody else said it. Or maybe my meaning was, I never said you stole money. I thought it, but I never actually said it. Or maybe my meaning was, I never said you stole money. It was the guy sitting next to you. Or maybe I meant, I never said you stole money. Perhaps you accidentally lit it on fire, or you lost it, or you did something else I didn't approve of. I didn't say you stole it. Or maybe my meaning was, I never said you stole money. You stole my bicycle or my iPod or something like that. And when I went through that little exercise there, it takes about 30 seconds, I said, now, which is more likely to be open to a misunderstanding of its meaning? This 6-word sentence, and I picked up the Bible in my other hand, I said, or the Holy Bible, comprised of all these different scriptures written by different people at different times for different purposes in different languages and so forth. I asked them, I said, which do you think, realistically speaking, is more likely to be open to a misinterpretation, these 6 words or the Bible? And they, of course, sheepishly said, well, obviously, the Bible. And so the point I was trying to make, and I could see on their faces the light of recognition. I could sense that they understood the point that I was trying to make. They didn't particularly like what I was saying, but they couldn't avoid seeing the truth of it, that those 6 words could yield up 5 different meanings. For somebody to say, I never said you stole money, does not mean, I never said you stole money. It's so obvious, it's almost, childish to go through it. But it was very interesting because the conversation concluded shortly after that by my saying, all I'm trying to get across to you is that you have your interpretation of the Bible, I have mine, but I have something you don't have. I have access to how the earliest Christians understood these doctrines that I'm speaking to you about, on the Holy Eucharist, on the papacy, on the veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints, and so forth. I said, I can trace a continuity of belief and understanding and certitude of doctrine from the present day as a Catholic back to the time of Christ and the apostles because of something called sacred tradition, something that informs us of the meaning of the words on the sacred page. Now, they said, well, we've heard that before. We don't buy into that. A couple of harumphs and that sort of thing. And then our discussion ended on a pleasant note, but they weren't buying what I was selling that night, and I certainly wasn't buying what they were selling that night, and that was the end of it. About 6 months later, give or take, I was speaking somewhere else, and one of those two Calvinist fellows showed up at the seminar, and he sat there and he listened, and I thought, well, I guess I'm going to be going to Denny's tonight after this one's over. Turns out, during the Q&A period, he identified himself as one of the guys that had asked me these questions before, and he said, but I want you to know that in the ensuing months since that conversation, I have decided that I made a big mistake by leaving the Catholic Church, and I'm coming, and he had actually come back home to the Catholic Church. He says, I've re-entered the church. And I was very happy to hear that, obviously, and I asked him, well, what did it? He says, well, I left Denny's that night really angry at this impertinent argument that you made that I thought was so shallow and silly. But he said, I couldn't refute it. In other words, I couldn't deny the simple truth that I never said you stole money can mean different things. And he said, so I decided to take you up on your challenge. So I started studying the Church Fathers. And he said, and that was my undoing, because as soon as I began to study the Church Fathers, all of my preconceptions about what Catholics believe and how Catholics are unbiblical and so forth began to fade away like the mist. And he says, I'm back in the Catholic Church. Now, I don't take credit for that. God and the Church Fathers can take credit for that. But I do think that there comes a time in all of our lives when we need to be able to say, however simply we may do it, the truth of the fact that the bare words on the page are not sufficient in themselves to tell us everything that we need to know. So with those things in mind, let me launch